Right. Welcome, Toko-pa. It's good to have you.
I'm so happy to be here with you. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's your second time here. And I like to start our conversations with a little check-in about how you started your day today.
Oh, I was teaching my latest cohort of dreamers. And so, yeah, it was a very enriching couple of hours where I do a little bit of teaching in the beginning and then we work together on one individual's dream in the context of the larger group. And then we have a group process around it. So the woman who came forward today just brought this really powerful, amazing dream that I think resonated for a lot of people. And so, yeah, I don't know, the stars were aligned for sure.
Thanks. And we get to continue that conversation about dreaming here today, which leads me to a question that I have, which is how it seems that you have devoted your life to dreams. And I'm
That's
wondering
wonderful.
how that came to be. How did you come to devote your life to dreams? Like, was there a particular moment or even a particular dream that you felt really initiated you onto this path?
People do ask me to sort of trace back, how I became interested in dreams. And the truth of the matter is, it was never any other way for me. Really, from the time that I was really young, I had these incredibly vivid, intriguing dreams. And I was always curious about them. And I think just attracted to symbolic language in general. And so, of course, there were pivotal dreams that I had in my life that certainly initiated me into taking this path in a more serious way rather than just for my personal interest. And I would call those initiatory dreams, dreams that really showed me that this was the medicine that I was meant to be bringing to the world through my writing. And I've had many of those kinds of dreams. Um, and many course corrections as well. But it is sort of like an ongoing conversation, isn't it?
And were there people in your life or were there external influences, like as you started having these vivid dreams when you were young, that supported you in learning how to interpret them or to understand that it was important to do that? Or was this really more self motivated?
Yeah, I grew up in a really unusual way. I grew up in a Sufi commune. And I say commune, but really the word we used was kanka, which is just a place of communal living and gathering. So, um, Sufism is a mystical practice of looking for the divine within. And there are many ways to practice that, certainly through contemplation of poetry, like the poetry of Rumi and other poets and philosophers. Um, and then, of course, having a relationship with nature and finding divine connection there, but also turning towards your dreams. Um, Playing music, singing, dancing, things like that. So that was kind of how I grew up. So you can imagine that whole context was very conducive to uh, having a rich inner life. And yes, I was encouraged to share my dreams, but I think the actual process of understanding their language came much later in life when I discovered Carl Jung. And I was probably about 19 years old, I think, when I found the book Man and His Symbols, which is a very good, accessible first book to get into the whole Jungian world. Jung is kind of notoriously difficult to read because he was very much academically inclined. Um, but he was a genius and he wrote so much. And there's still, you could study Jung for a lifetime and still barely scratch the surface of what he had to offer, and then of what all the people who ended up following in his footsteps and furthering the research on psyche and the dreams had to offer the field we would call depth psychology. And so that was sort of a long, meandering answer to your question, but certainly I was encouraged to share my dreams and be curious about them. But then the actual finessing and learning of the language came later through many years of study.
And one of the things that I appreciate about your approach, and I really want to point to your second book, your newest book, The Dreaming Way, Courting the Wisdom of Dreams. And I started reading this last fall. And one of the problems that I find that I come to, like when I'm normally reading books about dreams, which I didn't encounter with this, is that when there's like just sharing a lot of examples of dreams, which you do in this book, but somehow I was still really engaged in it. But sometimes when I'm reading books where there's just a lot of examples of dreams, I just kind of tune out because it doesn't really mean anything to me. It's like it doesn't pull me in. But this book, like every word pulled me in and it just spoke so deeply to my soul. And it's just such a feminine approach to dream work, and that you really speak to in this book as well. Like that, how that your approach is differentiated from Jung's approach. It draws on it, it's influenced by it, but it seems that it goes even deeper. Can you
Mm.
speak a little bit about what that means for you and why it's important for you to go to those deeper layers?
What a great question. And thank you for that reflection. I am delighted to know that the book was engaging and um, mm, felt for you, experiential for you. I think it is really normal to sort of drift off when you hear other people's dreams. And the reason why I think this happens is there's a two-pronged reason. One is that we're so used to thinking in rational, structured ways that once the language of the dream starts emerging, it's very non sequitur, it's irrational, and our brain just kind of goes fuzzy because we don't really speak that language. And the other reason is because I think it actually activates our own dreaming faculties. We start hearing a dream and we start thinking about our own dreams, and it starts like we go into a dreamy kind of state, which is really cool in a way because it means that um, something is getting activated at least. So, your bigger question about how my work differentiates from that purely psychological approach to dreams is is an important question, because I think for me it really was a trajectory of very much following on that path, because Jung um, really was an incredible pioneer in this field, to the extent that I don't even think we can truly wrap our minds completely around, because it's so far reaching and depthful. And yet, in that world and that use of language, psychological language, I found myself hitting up against limitations where I would personally find myself going into an analytical place, a logical place, a um, um, interpretive place in relationship with my dreams. And this wasn't the kind of relationship I wanted to have with my dreams, or had in my mystical upbringing, where it was so much more experiential. And I really felt when I was engaging with my dreams that it was a living relational kind of process, that these were beings that I was encountering in the dreaming realm. And as I met them and I made those encounters, that they changed me and I changed them. So there was something participatory about the process of dream work that I felt was missing in the purely psychological or academic realms. And I will just say that I think it was necessary for Jung to take that approach in order to be respected by the larger scientific field that he was forging a path for the first time within. But for me personally, I didn't have those pressures on my shoulders. So I began to turn to more indigenous practices working with dreams and asking the question, why is it that most of the older cultures that we learn about, encounter, or that still exist on today's planet always have a relationship with their dreams at the community level, at the family level? But yet, we here in Western civilization don't. We are not encouraged to remember our dreams. We are not taught the value of dreams. We're not taught how to understand symbolic language. It really is just treated as with a kind of dismissal and devaluation. And so I've sort of taken it upon myself to contribute to the mission that many others are also contributing to, of reclaiming dreaming back from those ivory towers, from the kind of academic gaze, and bringing it back into a daily practice and trying to discern what are the tools that are accessible enough for every single one of us to come back into relationship with what I think is our mother tongue.
Can you say more about this mother tongue?
Yeah, because dreaming is spontaneously being produced through us in the very same way that our heart beats on its own, our breath breathes through our lungs, and blood circulates through our veins. Like all of nature, there's a natural process taking place biologically in our physiology, which is the dreaming. It's necessary to being alive. And so, in this sense, we can say that um, it is nature naturing through us. And maybe we can even take that one step further and say it's nature's language, this production of symbols, of images, of story is not only necessary to our being alive, but that it is a kind of language of the body. It is a somatic language. And therefore, it precedes the world of spoken speech, of text, of written language. It's the language of images that comes right out of the earth itself, right out of our own bodies. It's kind of amazing, don't you think?
I do. And it is like, even though it is like the mother tongue, we have, or I'll just speak for myself, but I think that this is a larger cultural phenomenon. We've become disconnected from that
Mm.
and more ignorant in it or of it. And I found, from reading this book, I felt a deep call from my soul to connect more deeply with my dreams. And I have kept dream journals at different times in my life. I remember in my 20s, I was practicing lucid dreaming for some time when I was just very into yoga. And so I've done different practices here and there, but I've never had a consistent practice of like really interpreting my dreams and following them from, dream to dream to dream, how they build on each other, how they weave into my daily life. And after reading this, I felt really called to go deeper into the process. And I worked privately with you, and some of the things in our sessions, it's like you kept reminding me of, this isn't necessarily literal. This is more of a metaphor for something happening inside of you. And it's like I'm just keep needing to remind myself, like, this thing in my dream is not actually representing that external thing. It's pointing to a dynamic within my own psyche, within my own soul. And so
Yes.
what can help us to make more of this shift, or have more, like, return more to that mother tongue of metaphor, of like, the language of dreams?
Yes, I think you've touched on the key shift that we have to make when working with dreams and understanding this language is making that transition between literal thinking to symbolic thinking. And this is challenging for us because everything in our culture is weighted towards materiality, towards literal thinking, towards what is the observable, known, quantifiable, objective world. And the 400 years of rationalism have given rise to the culture we are now embedded in. And part of what has happened with that huge emphasis on those things on the what we call the physical world is a simultaneous devaluing of everything that falls into what we would call the symbolic life. And so this includes everything from our dreams, from the feeling life, intuition, the even synchronicity and the kinds of magic that happen while in the physical world but have a dreamlike quality. And so this division where we no longer as easily see the sacred dimension of reality means that we've become split off from that within ourselves. And we've lost the language, like many languages have been lost as a result of over development, right? So too have we overdeveloped certain aspects of our collective values and lost the language of the soul. So you were talking about making this shift between the literal to the symbolic. How do you do this? Well, one of the things I think is really important to start with is to get into the anatomy of a dream a little bit to understand, what exactly is this language and what is this language functioning for? Why is it doing this way? And so when you look at the etymology of the word metaphor, and metaphors are what make up our dreams are filled with metaphors. And so when you look at the word metaphor, it you can break it down into two words, meta and ferin. And this is from the Latin origins of the word. So meta means to carry over like a bridge. And ferin, no, do I have that right? Meta is over, ferin is to carry. So with them together, it means like to carry over a bridge. And so a metaphor is bridging two worlds, those two worlds I talked about that we have been, we are under the illusion of them being separate. And so metaphor is really a form of joinery. It's a language which offers us images to explain our experiences and give those experiences form, but in a different form than the one we are experiencing. I know that sounds a little abstract, but so I'll try and give you an example. Let's say, for instance, you're in a relationship and the relationship is kind of having trouble. The relationship is on the rocks. And that night, you have a dream that you've been shipwrecked on rocks and your boat has been smashed a little, and you're there with your partner and you don't know what you're going to do. Well, you're not literally on the rocks, but you are being given this image of seeing the impact of some hurt, some fracturing, of the togetherness of your relationship coming apart. And you are also embedded in that ecology of images, are offered different ways of thinking of a solution. Maybe we can repair the craft. Maybe it's just a small crack. maybe we can, if we work together, soften the edges of our sharp conversations. Maybe we can get that boat back into the water because I see that there's a more accessible shore not too far in the distance. So you see, it offers as a different set of images, a metaphor, in order to help us find solutions for the literal issue we might be facing in waking life. And in so doing, we have this now a layered experience of reality, the implicit dimension, which is showing us what this really feels like to be crashed on the rocks, and the explicit dimension of the experience, which is, I'm having some trouble in my relationship and it's just making me anxious in a way I can't really give language to. So now we have these two layers, and we have a more enriched experience and description of what we're going through, as well as sort of embedded solutions which can help us find our way forward.
One of the things that really led me into feeling more drawn to dream work right now is just feeling, and I've spoken about this on the podcast, and I've spoken about to you about it a bit, is in this life period of perimenopause, moving towards menopause, and feeling like there is something deeper in me moving, wanting to come forward, to be expressed, to be experienced. So it's like bringing something deep inside out externally in lived day-to-day life, which includes in my work, which really feels more like a calling. And I know that many women here feel the same way, that the work that they're doing is, yes, it's air quotes work, but it's like a deeper soul drive, a deeper soul mission or purpose. How do you feel that dreams can support us in living that more fully, or like living more into our authentic selves and kind of like our, I know Jung calls it our telos, like our innate potential. What is the role that dreams, what role do dreams play in us living that out?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. Well, from the Jungian perspective, we come into this life with an inborn story. And I relate that to a lot of the rest of nature because I'm very much an animist. So when I think of, the classic example of the acorn, that in that tiny little nut contains the hugeness of the oak tree. And we think of this, of course, at a physical level, but why wouldn't that be true also at a soul level? And so, if we take the perspective that we come into life with a potential to fulfill, a purpose to realize, even a destiny to come into alignment with, that dreams are a kind of nudging along or a pulling towards that wholeness. And the reason why we know this is very simple, but also very profound, which is that when you receive one dream, and if you really deeply integrate how that dream means for you, then the next dream that you receive will be building upon the first understanding. And you kind of alluded to this earlier when you talked about pulling the thread through a series of dreams and starting to see a pattern, starting to see a path. Well, all along, it means you have been following a path that the dream is nudging you towards. The other way we know this is with recurring dreams. So when you could have recurring dreams for 20 years, and there's a sense of being caught in a loop of perhaps being triggered by either an internal or external moment, which causes you to have a response, which is a habitual response, and then it creating a similar outcome over and over again. This is why you have recurring dreams, because you're meeting a habitual threat or trigger with a habitual response and then having a habitual outcome. And so it is like being caught in a loop. However, if you can really pay attention to this dream and try to understand each of those elements, then the dream begins to move forward. A recurring dream that has been going on for 20 years or 10 years or 5 years, whatever it may be, 6 months, when it's understood, the dream starts to move forward, which is to say, its images begin to evolve, sometimes in subtle ways, sometimes in dramatic ways. And it's those evolutions we want to pay attention to because they show the way in which we are evolving in relation to the issue at hand. So, what does this mean? It means something in us knows where we're meant to go. And it's providing us with each next step, each close in next step that we are taking in present time in order to step into that next becoming. So, how would it know what is the next step unless it already had an idea of the whole oak tree in um, in its consciousness? I say, and I say it's, in the dream. The way that I frame it is through the figure of Sophia, and so Sophia is a feminine representation of divine wisdom. And we find it through all kinds of ancient scriptures and literature throughout time. And she takes many different forms, but Sophia is perhaps her best known form. And the other way to look at her is just through the language of wisdom. So wisdom is a knower within us. It knows it knows the oak tree, and it is offering us, she is offering us these clues, breadcrumbs upon the path to help us become the oak tree.
How do you, I know this is a big question, but I'll just see what comes forward from you. But how would you say that your dreams have crafted the life that you're living today and the work that you're sharing today? Like what degree to which do you think that they've influenced that?
Like entirely, entirely. I always say that my dreams really raised me. I think of my dreams as a kind of parenting because I didn't have parents. And I left home at a very young age. And so what I did was quite instinctively, and this is true for a lot of people in a moment of crisis, I turned towards my dreams and I started just to write them down, to journal with them. And it would take many years before I understood what the heck they were saying to me, even just a little bit. And even now, I'm just kind of scratching the surface. However, um, not only were they offering me images at every brave step I was taking, but they were always encouraging me, similar to, I think of the image of the salmon who somehow just knows that it must go against the stream. It's against all odds that it must travel to go towards this impulse, which is calling it homeward. And for me, that is what dreams do and always have done. And so every dream I've ever received has shaped me, and I have also shaped them in return because it was a reciprocal relationship. And it's not as if I don't, or we don't, or anyone doesn't have volition. There's always a choice, and there's no such thing as a wrong choice. But there is a sense of being corrected. As you lean to the left and to the right to try and find a sense of balance as you move through life. But in a more practical way, I can say that my dreams have informed my writing because everything I've ever written about has come as a result of something my dreams have taught me, and also provided images to help convey those ideas into writing. So, in that very physical way, the images that people come across in my writing have come directly out of my dreams, out of other people's dreams, but the wisdom also that they have offered There were years and years where I was searching for a teacher. I wanted, oh, I ached for this idea of a mentor, of someone who would know me better than I knew myself and who would tell me, what, what was good about me? What could I do that was worthwhile? And I spent a lot of years looking in vain and even, got into some situations where I became very disappointed with external teachers, and I won't get into that can of worms. But I will say, while I have had some incredible people coming into my path to help teach me. So, human teachers, that beyond all of the human teachers, my dreams have taught me just about everything that I know, which isn't much, but it is what I have so far. And so, yes, in a way that's completely indivisible, my life has been shaped by my dreams.
You mentioned that your kind of relationship with your dreams started with simply writing them down. And then after some years, you started to learn some tools to start to interpret them. And you said you're still just barely scratching the surface. But what would you say that your current dreaming practice looks like right now?
Yes, well, sometimes are busier than other times in the waking life. And when that happens, dreams tend to recede. So it can be a bit cyclical in that there are times that I consider really profound dreaming um, cluster moments. And then in those times, I will receive a lot of dreams night after night after night. And I will have hopefully more time to tend to and make a courtship of those dreams. And and so in a given week, I would probably remember 2 to 3 dreams intentionally, and I would probably spend at least an hour journaling with each of those dreams. And so that may look like writing down the initial dream and then looking at the key symbols. I might draw out 3 or 4 key symbols depending on the time that I have available that day and go through a process that I call courtship. And I teach that in the book, The Dreaming Way, where I lead people through a process of holding real presence for the dream itself, trying to capture in language as best I can and in as detailed a way possible the statement of the dream. And then I come to the dream with a kind of curiosity, a wondering, where I am curious about the images there. And I try to elicit from myself descriptions of the figure or image or symbol. I try to make it explicit what I think about that symbol and what it brings up for me. And then also what associations I have immediately churning in me as I write about it. And then I might take a step back in what I call a reflection process and look at all that has now emerged from my journaling and and just reflect. And that might look like taking a walk outside or doing some yoga or even just having a shower, something where I step away from everything and I just let the pieces settle. And that's a very ephemeral but magical part of the process where I'm no longer working on the dream is working on me. And this is where connections start to spontaneously appear. And then I may come back and synthesize what I have learned from the dream in some subsequent writing, or I might decide to do a ritual of some kind or an enactment in my life to give thanks to and value to what the dream has taught me. For me, that often looks like writing because I'm a writer, but someone else, it might look like, um, doing, putting something on their dream altar to represent the wisdom they've received. And for somebody else, it might look like a social experiment, like, I keep getting into this tricky situation, so I'm going to try to behave differently when it happens next. Or I might try to step out into the world in a way that's different for me than I'm used to behaving because it speaks to something that came up in the dream. So that's sort of a very brief overview of the courtship process when working with my own dreams.
So I just want to just repeat that back and let me know if I miss anything here. So you have a dream that feels significant and you write it down with as much detail as possible. And I remember from your book, you recommend writing down in a present tense. Is that right?
Yes, exactly, because there's something magical about writing from inside your dream as opposed to looking at it as an observer. So you say, I am standing on the threshold of my childhood home instead of I was standing on my threshold of the childhood home, whatever. When you say it in present tense, when you write it, often what happens is new details emerge. And I also really love the habit of giving my dream a title, sort of like a headline for a news story. This is a great mnemonic device. So when you're looking back through your journal, the title will trigger a memory of the dream, but it also acts kind of like a mini interpretation because in forcing yourself to write a headline for the dream, you have to tune in to what is the most salient part of the dream story.
Yeah, I remember reading that in the book, and I haven't been doing that. So I'm going to start doing that. I'm thinking about a particular dream that I had last night that's wanting me to spend some time with it. So I wrote it down, present tense, and like you said, like as you're writing in present tense and more details, you might remember more details. And then you pick out maybe like the three biggest images or metaphors in it, would you
Yeah, so
say?
the way that I would um, ask that question is, what are the what are three or four of the strongest moments that stayed with me? And usually there's a high concentration of emotion or a figure that feels really intriguing or upsetting, even, or an image that is just kind of like a pebble in the sieve, we really can't quite get it out of our minds because we're so curious about it. So we're just looking for those the most intriguing to you parts of the dream, just to sort of uh, mm, concentrate the process a little more because you could really tend to every single image in the dream, but most people don't have that kind of time. So it's a just way of a way of zeroing in on the most important aspects.
Right. So you take those maybe three or four kind of focal points, and then you do some more journaling about it. Like, what is this? What other associations do I have about this? What feelings come up around this? And kind of just through association, more things might be revealed to you about that particular focal point.
Yes, and one thing that can be really helpful is to create a description of the image, like giving it a definition. And the reason why this is helpful is because we all think about things in a different way, and we take the way that we think about things for granted because it's just the way we think about them. So if we force ourselves to give something a definition, it can somehow externalize for us how we think about something. So I'll give you an example. Two people might dream of a dog. One person grew up with a wonderful German Shepherd who was their best friend in the whole world, and they have nothing but like wonderful, gushy feelings about the dog. Another person might have been horribly attacked by a neighbor's dog when they were 5 years old, and they have feelings of territoriality and fear and viciousness and guardedness when it comes to thinking of a dog. So one person might define a dog as a loyal, loving, creature full of unconditional love. The other person says a dog is a fearsome, territorial creature that guards mm, people's homes, so just throwing out some examples here. But you see, both are true, but they're true for each of those people. And it's that kind of underlying, like, what is your knee jerk reaction to this symbol and what you think about it that you're trying to get at in this second part of the process, which is the inquiry, which is the asking yourself artful questions about the dream.
So you do some journaling about that, and then you just kind of let it sit for a bit. You might, like you said, you might go for a walk or just shift your focus and move from working on the dream to letting the dream work on you.
Yeah.
And then you come back to it and see, well, what's arising now? What additional insights or reflections are coming forward now?
Yeah. And for some people, that reflective process might be happening all along, and you might not need to go for a walk or take a break. But even just like taking a beat and letting things settle and checking in with your body to see, like, what resonates. That's really what we're looking for. And those moments of, oh, that feels like it's the thing. That's the piece, or that's the aha moment. Or that gives me chills, or that tracks with something that I've been wrestling with. Those are the anchor points that you want to find in the dream when you're in the reflective process. And you may have those instantly, in which case you can continue journaling about that and exploring those bridges back to waking life. And that's sort of a piece I didn't talk too much about, which is a key I call relating, which comes after the reflective process. And I use the word relating because it's like a bridge. We're making a relationship between what we found in the dream and what's happening for us in waking life. And so when you come back from reflecting, that's essentially what you're coming back to the dream with is, what's going on in my waking life that caused this dream to appear right now in this time in this perfectly captured way in order to teach me something. So making those bridges takes some practice, but if you have gone deeply enough into the inquiry of looking into those images and trying to find your associations about them, of uh, getting at the subtle feeling and descriptive qualities of each of those images that you chose, at this point, you should be ready to be making bridges back to waking life. And a lot of this can happen spontaneously because it's not really a step by step process. Every single one of these keys that I've talked about in the courtship process can happen in one layered moment, where you're asking a question to yourself about the dream and it suddenly pops up an aha moment and you make a bridge back to waking life. It can all just happen in an instant, also. So it's not really a linear process. I think of these things more like gestures or ways of approaching the dream, which is why I call it my courtship method, because it's really a way of getting the dream to open its wisdom to us through a respectful and gentle inquiry.
So
And
what
then,
I'm
yeah.
hearing with
And
that
then,
piece that you just added, it's like that's the integration point. Like how is this like what is this communicating to me about my waking life? And then what you shared earlier, which I forgot to repeat again, was some sort of a gesture of maybe adding something to your dream altar or creating a ritual or enacting something that's out of the ordinary in your day-to-day life, just really communicating to your dreams. I'm listening, I'm learning, and I'm acting on this. So it kind of reminds me of when women come on retreat with me on the final morning, we always talk about integration. Like you had all these insights and ahas and these big expansions. And now how are you going to integrate this back into your day-to-day life where the rubber's really meeting the road?
yeah, and this is how this approach is to dream work is very different from an analytical method, because with when we're analyzing a dream, we're literally kind of surgically pulling it apart and trying to get to a bottom line and figure out what it means. And this is why you end up with dream dictionaries, right? Which say this means that, and it may not like resonate for you at all because it has nothing to do with your personal associations to those images, nor is it alive. It becomes a static definition. But really, in the end of your process, you don't want to feel as if you have a dead thing in your hands. The dream really should remain intact, it should remain alive. And the way to do this, I think, is through this final stage, which I call synthesis. And synthesis is gathering up all those pieces and bringing them back into cohesion in some way, either by continuing the conversation with wisdom, with Sophia, with the animate world behind this one, or by making an offering back to it to say, you know, I really received something really powerful and meaningful from this process, and I thank you, and more, please. you know.
And thinking about some of the women listening, and maybe they're mothering young children, or they're caring for aging parents, or they're going through a big life shift and have a full day-to-day life, working with a lot of clients or just having a lot of responsibilities. So speaking to a woman who has a lot on her plate, what is a way that she can start courting her dreams? And I think I remember something in the book about even like saying a prayer or stating an intention to the dream maker of wanting to build that relationship. Like how where would someone who doesn't have much time and has a lot of pull to the external world, where would she start?
Yes, I mean, that's such a tricky question because there are some things that are beyond our control. And, you know, things like insomnia can certainly interrupt your dreaming process. Having young children who want your attention first thing in the morning, having a job with, having to race out of the house first thing in the morning. So we have to work within those limitations. I do recommend doing whatever you can to avoid waking up to an alarm clock because this is a killer of dreams. And if you, the internal body clock is actually pretty powerful, and we can train ourselves to wake up a little earlier than we need to in order to have that space and time that we need to remember our dreams. Just to remember them is the first step. Um, and so I offer some more detailed tips for dream recovery in my book. But without getting into the minutia of that, maybe we can say it's important to elbow out a little bit of room for yourself and your soul. I mean, whatever you do, whatever is going on for you in life, you have to first be able to make it a priority somehow. And if you're just succumbing to all the demands upon your time and space, then it's natural that you're not going to remember your dreams. They're it's a practice, and if you are not putting something in, you're not going to receive anything, unfortunately. So I encourage you to find a way to break that habit of forgetting, because remembering is a choice. And so, whatever you can do to elbow out a little bit of room for yourself is key. And if it just happens cyclically, for instance, in my life, I have very busy periods, and I don't beat myself up for not having being able to remember dreams during those periods. But I do cherish the times when I am less busy, and I make sure that my dreams are a priority for me. Um, and yes, I loved you bringing in this piece around prayer and intention, because those things are incredibly important. If we think of the dreaming as a living place, as I don't want to say entity, but I will say like another half of our lives that is desperate to be tended to and has so much to offer us, then why can't we have a conversation with it? And maybe the intent that we set is something like, can I please receive a dream that is short and sweet or succinct so I don't have to remember much, but I can receive something? And then the trick is not to dismiss it and say, oh, all I had was a fragment or like a single image, because that's the temptation. And a lot of people do that. They say, oh, you have such wonderful dreams that have so many mystical elements. I just dreamt about, my workplace. And so it was probably nonsense. And we have all kinds of special ways of dismissing our dreams, instead of loving the dreams that we are given. And I promise you that even if your dream seems insignificant or just a fragment or not meaningful in some way, don't believe that lie. That lie is your rational brain trying to muscle dominance in your psyche. And it has enough dominance. Hear it, dismiss it, and come back to giving relevance to your dream. And even if it's just a small fragment, sometimes those dreams are the most powerful of all. Um, so, yes, you can say a prayer. You can keep your journal beside your bedside. If you have a talisman or taliswoman of some kind that helps you remember your soul, you can put it under your pillow or beside your bed and just say a gentle prayer, which kind of just assumes that you will receive what you need, and without putting any pressure on yourself, and say, I trust that I will remember a dream when I wake up, and I intend to write it down, even if it's just a fragment, and to give it some attention when I have time. And then when you receive your dream in the morning, one trick is to just stay in the position that you wake up in, keeping your eyes closed, and then just try to rehearse the dream in your mind's eye 3 or 4 times. And the trick is not to fall back asleep into more dreams, but instead come back to the beginning of the dream, rehearse it in as much detail as you can 3 or 4 times, and then you'll find that you'll have quite a solid memory of it. And then you can do what you need to do to get yourself out of bed and, feed the kids or the cat or the dog or whatever it is you have to do. But try not to check your notifications and get into like rational calendar and clocks mindset. And instead, just give yourself a moment with your coffee or your tea and just try to at least write the dream down. Start there. And then later, when you have time on the weekend or in a quiet moment, you can go through a courtship process to see what you discover.
And as we move towards our close, we've talked about the importance of courting our dreams. And I also want to talk a little bit about what you call dream abandonment as a kind of soul loss. And what is the danger for us of losing touch with our dreams?
Well, I think all we have to do is look at the newspapers to get that answer. Because we live in a culture where people are not being guided by their souls, they are being guided by the rules and values of a very one sided culture. And mm, we didn't really speak that much or at all about shadow work, but I'm sure this is a term that is familiar to most of your listeners. I know it is for you, Sarah. Um, Shadow work is an essential part of dream work, because dreams will show us those things we are not acknowledging, that we are hiding from ourselves, that we haven't yet discovered about ourselves, or that we that have been discouraged or dismissed in who we are by others. And so when we open that long black bag we drag behind us, as the poet Robert Bly calls it, um, we are living a more complete and conscious life, which is inclusive of the entire spectrum of who we are and not just this narrow band that we've inherited from the culture. And when we do that, we are far less likely to enact shadow in the world, which is to say, try to dominate others or not be aware of the moral implications of our actions or use violence instead of acknowledging the internal violence that we are doing to ourselves. And so this is obviously a big topic and we've run out of time, but I think if uh, if we take anything away from this, it is that at the very personal level, what happens when we don't pay attention to our dreams is, of course, you can lead a full and complete life without paying attention to your dreams. But a life guided by your dreams is a life of purpose and meaning and sense of connectedness. And so, not just connectedness to, say, the larger something greater that guides the entire ecosystem and cosmos, but also to each other and to the more than human world that is all around us.
And Toko-pa, what is your current growing edge?
Mm. Is it okay to take a pause here so I can answer you
Please
honestly?
do. Yeah.
Okay. Hmm. Oh, I know exactly what it is. My growing edge is speaking on things that have been excluded from the palette of social acceptability. You know, I think there are huge pressures in especially online social spaces to speak in a certain way, to hold certain mm, um, opinions, even ideologies that may not agree with who we are. But there's a great threat, I think, that we all feel that if we don't follow suit with what is expected in those spaces, that we might be canceled or deplatformed or really even just um, um, drawing out the ire that seems to have become the growing way of speaking to each other on social media. And so I think a lot for me, there are places in which I have become too quiet because I don't want to get into those kinds of arguments and things online. So I think I don't know if you find this, Sarah, but it feels like it's an incredibly hard time to just have a differing opinion from what everyone else is saying.
Yeah. And I feel excited about that edge for you and to see what comes forward from it. And it's also something that I've been thinking about in my own way too. So it's just, encouraging me to bring more reflection there.
Mm,
So I really want to encourage listeners to get this book, The Dreaming Way. It is one of those books that you just want to always have with you, ideally just close to your bed, or if you have like a sacred space in your home, you'll want to refer to it again and again. There's so much wisdom in here and also step-by-step practicality, so much that we just didn't have time to get into, just different types of dreams, um, different symbols in dreams, and really just this whole pathway of using our dreams as teachers and as guides. And Tokova, I'm wondering if there is anything you want to point us to. We'll have all of your information in the show notes, but anything coming up or anything that you want listeners to know about in addition to your book?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I pretty recently started a Substack just a few months ago. And that's the place where I have been writing on my growing edge. So if people want to go find me there, I'm very easy to find because I'm the only Toko-pa, Tokopa. And also, I have a bunch of, events and courses and things like that that people will hear about only if they join up to my mailing list, which you can find on my website. And I'm not one of those people who emails very often. In fact, I'm a delinquent non emailer. So I'm trying to reform my ways, and my habit intent to make a habit is to send out one meaningful newsletter on the new moon of every month, and then to send a roundup of events that I have coming up on the full moon. Or maybe is that reversed? No, I think that's right. Yeah, so find me on Substack and sign up on my website, and yeah, stay in touch.
Great. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for just the wisdom that you share in your books and just in all that you offer. I've learned so much from you, and I know that our listeners will too.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah.